Now, although COVID-19 has obviously upended so much of our lives, this session delves into how it's affected the women's empowerment movement in particular. Has time at home, for some of course, not all those key workers, helped certain women find more balance between their professional and personal life, or the opposite? And are men, or should they be, and how should they be responding? Well, our panelists for this discussion are Oliver Bullhatchett, British Deputy High Commissioner in Chennai, Mani Trivedi, who is co-founder of the creative agency Magenta, which is a branding and corporate communications company, and Indigo, which is a creative outsourced offering. And she's joining us from Goa today. Priya Guha, a venture partner at Merian Ventures, investing in women-led innovation. Priya is a member of Innovate UK, which is the UK government's innovation agency. And Priya also used to be a diplomat posted in India. And lastly, Rima Sengupta, a senior associate at Axiom Stone Solicitors. She's a dual qualified solicitor in India and the UK, and a board member of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you all. Let's get Oliver to kick things off for us and speak about the FCDO's Gender Equality Charter.
Excellent, thank you very much, and good day to everybody. I'm really looking forward to later on talking about how we've got through one of the world's strictest lockdowns here in Chennai, both for our male and female members of staff and the impact that that's had on them. But yeah, let me start by, because it's very timely, by talking about our Gender Equality Charter, which was launched just yesterday. We call it our Pledge for Progress. We rather hesitated, whatever the word is. We went out to try and get a lot of companies and other organizations signed up to this. And we were absolutely blown over by the interest. We, in very short time, we got 114 organisations across India to sign up to this initiative, to this Pledge for Progress. Essentially, there are five strands to Pledge for Progress, and the point of it is to campaign with partners across India to promote gender equality and mobilise real change. So the five strands are lead, represent, embed, include, and mobilize. So lead, very briefly, is using our platforms to amplify the voices of women leaders within our organizations and beyond. Represent is to seek gender diverse representation when hosting and participating in panels and round tables, for example. Embed is striving to include gender analysis in the design and implementation and evaluation of our work. Include is making our organizations great places for people of all genders to work and ensuring our internal policies fulfill that aim. And mobilize is working as a collective, these 114 and hopefully more in the future organizations, a collective of gender equality champions developing and sharing best practice together to implement this pledge. And we had huge organizations, small organizations, mostly businesses, but certainly other organizations as well sign up to this. Some of them actually didn't, and I pushed very hard. I got 25 organizations from Chennai to sign up to this, and some didn't want to because they didn't think they had a good enough story to tell. I tried to convince them that that was okay. We were just starting the conversation, and others were very brave. They said, look, we have a very low representation of women, but we want to sign up to this because we know we need to do better. So it launched yesterday, and it got good publicity, and we're really happy with how it started.
The stats from this pandemic on how women are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19, not the disease itself, which of course, as a lot of studies are suggesting, is affecting men a little bit more. But in terms of the consequences, it does make for grim reading. One stat I read, women are nearly twice as likely to lose their job. And I think a lot of the reasoning, and I think that's what we need to discuss first, why is that? Women are more likely to be in low paid positions, perhaps more informal positions, perhaps more insecure jobs. What are you all hearing about how women have been affected? Let's start with you, Priya, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, I think, Sonali, you hit the nail on the head when you refer to the impact being disproportionately felt by women. Often because if you take the UK context, a number of women are in the hospitality sector, for example, which is the one that in the numerous lockdowns we've been going through has been most affected and will continue to be affected despite the wide-ranging government support that is there to help that sector. But I think it goes beyond that segment. What we are seeing is that, for example, female academics are publishing less than their male counterparts. We're seeing that the already underrepresented groups in tech, the area where I work, are disproportionately not having access to things like investment, which will help them scale. And so what I'm seeing is a real risk of some of the inequities that were already there being exacerbated by the pandemic, which is a very, very worrying trend, as you rightly note.
So really a pandemic, but doesn't a pandemic or a crisis like this, often recessions actually, sometimes they do magnify existing inequalities? And is that what you're saying, that that's what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you take the tech sector, for example, which is the one I work in most, so there was a study done in early 2019, led by Alison Rose, who's now the CEO of NatWest organization. Alison found that only 1 pence in every pound of investment went to female-led businesses. And actually, what that was resulting in is a loss of approximately something like £250 billion to the UK economy, because we're not seeing that parity in the potential for growth and success. So, these inequities were there beforehand. We're talking specifically here about gender, but this goes more broadly to other underrepresented groups, Black founders, people from LGBTQ backgrounds. And we have seen the pandemic, therefore, having a disproportionate hit because these are groups that were already underrepresented. And that's a real problem.
Rima, you yourself are sitting in an office in central London. You've been walking in every day since all of this began, and you've been going to the office, which a lot of my friends have been as well, because it helps them compartmentalize. But most people I know have ended up working from home. And I've heard women say, I feel like a 1960s housewife suddenly, and yet I have a full-time job. What are you hearing?
Sonali, with me, I'm single, I live alone. And to keep me sane, I decided that voluntarily I'll walk to work every day. There was literally no one in my office. I was new in my workplace, and the profession I come from is predominantly male-oriented. The firm I work for, 80% of the staff is female. We're really encouraged to work, being women. I really enjoyed coming in, and I did my part. I won't say I've gone through inequality. My managing partner and the chairman of my firm has been really encouraging. They supported us. We've been having Zoom drinks and Zoom quizzes for our team members, for the entire office. I think we supported each other. We knew it was difficult. We needed to work. If we didn't have the technology that we have nowadays, it wouldn't have been possible. So for me, if you want to be there, you can. So, for me, it was like walking to work. Others were working from home. I can't comment much on the domestic issues because I don't have a husband or a partner, but I'm sure people have been going through a lot of issues. I spoke to our head of matrimonial family, and she said she's really busy and they've been issuing a lot of protection orders. So I'm quite lucky. But there is inequality. We haven't faced it. We've had no redundancies, luckily.
I think one of the issues, certainly here in the UK, Mani, and I would really appreciate a perspective from India, but one of the issues early on in the pandemic here, and I think Rima has highlighted this, that there didn't used to be such a huge gap between the women that had families and the women that didn't, because actually you had someone else taking care of the kids, so we could work as much as the men did, but because when schools closed down, suddenly women with families were also homeschooling. Now, of course, in many families, men were also homeschooling, but all of the stats say that women were doing more of the homeschooling and more of the domestic duties, and suddenly no one was looking after your children, and you were trying to hold down a job and doing all of that. And do you think the gap between the women with families and the women who have chosen not to have a family or aren't in that position, do you think that's widened, Money?
Great question. And I think, in an India context, one of the things that really differentiates India and these kinds of economies from the West is the joint family system. And so what you have is, resident babysitters and grandparents who are just on tap. Now what's happened is that everyone's working from home. Now, if I take our context with my business, is most of our clients, 99% of my clients, are in the West, in the UK and the US. So we're actually used to remote working, albeit from our office. And on top of that, 95% of my staff are women. We actually have the opposite problem in that we need to have a bit more gender balance and have a few more, guys on the team. And so from our perspective, we've just sort of pushed that a little bit. We've tweaked it. Everyone's working from home. We've supported them so that they can go and, be with we've got one team member in Indore, one team member in Calcutta. I'm now in Goa, a few people around Bombay, so we've supported them. And, one has a baby, so we know that we need to be flexible, and that's fine, and allowing that flexibility gives you a lot of loyalty back. Now, not everyone is in that fortunate a position. They've got joint families, going back to my earlier point. And what's happening is that they're seeing being at home as equivalent to a holiday. And therefore, women have got, we all know about the women's double day of work. So you go to work, you do your work, and then you come home and do your unpaid work, which is obviously priceless. And, be that wife, partner, mother, daughter-in-law, whatever. But what's happening is that is just stretching. And the families at home are not seeing that, actually I've got this commitment. So between this time and this time, I need to be in my work environment, be it from home. So I think, women are even more stretched. And a lot of my friends, I was asking a lot of my female entrepreneur friends, how are you supporting your female team members, your colleagues, and or what feedback are you getting? And that has been the biggest feedback, that the ones that are in joint families have got are having to work 3 times harder, and they're plate spinning, they're multitasking even more than they normally do. And it's a country where you have help, you have maids. It's a culture where there is home domestic help. Now suddenly that's all been taken away, but that will land basically on the woman, the daughter-in-law, who has to wash the dishes, scrub the pans. Obviously your washing machine will have broken down and there isn't an engineer able to come, so you've got to wash your clothes by hand. And then she's got to meet her deadlines work-wise and school her children. So it's been doubly hard.
Priya, I know you wanted to jump in here. Have we rolled back time?
Well, I think I just wanted to sort of make one point, that sometimes it's perceived that, the West has got this right. And I think if you look at the actual statistics that have come out of the COVID period, the studies are showing that about 2/3 of unpaid work happening in the domestic setting is being done by women, and that's for Northern Europe. So I just wanted to sort of flag that, because I think there's this perception that it's sometimes, everything's working great in Northern Europe, and these are issues which affect India and other countries more because of some of the traditional cultural setups that we were just talking about in that conversation. And I don't think it is. I think this is a global problem, and a global problem where there is an increasing economic analysis happening about how we recognize the value of this for our collective societies. How do we recognize the value of the work that has always historically been valued at zero for our economies? And I think one of the things that I hope will come out of this is a recognition that unpaid work is a huge economic driver and a huge support to economies, whether you're in India, whether you're in the UK, or whether you're anywhere in the world.
And there's also talk about schools and educational institutions and childcare specifically needing to be thought of more as infrastructure, just like a train system is, because without childcare, a lot of the economy can't get moving. Oliver, working from home is something that many people, especially women, have been fighting for, to allow flexibility in their lives. Has this pandemic made workplaces realize that some people can work from home?
Absolutely. In our case, absolutely. I think that the Foreign Office, which is now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, I've been in this organization for 16 years, and in the last 5 years, I've seen a significant shift towards the appreciation that people can work from home. And we had a tech overhaul that gave us the laptops and the phones and the devices to be able to do that. And that was very timely, because that tech overhaul was completed only recently. So that meant that during the pandemic, everybody was able to work from home in what, in the old days, and not too long ago, had traditionally been an industry where you had to go to the office because of security and sensitivities and that sort of thing. But there were still obviously some people who were a little bit suspicious of whether people could be productive at home. And actually, I, as a head of this post here, and speaking to other heads of post and other team leaders, we have all realized that actually productivity, you can come to work and be unproductive, and you can tell who is productive. And actually, people have now embraced working from home, and I think that it's shifted us along years in that evolution towards people being able to work from home. And I think there are some upsides and some downsides, and I'd agree with what everybody has said, because I have seen some women who have these caring sort of responsibilities of children or parents or of the home, which is always still traditionally falls to women. I have seen them actually appreciate that they have now got the opportunity to work from home and lead a more sort of flexible life. On the flip side to that, and for all of us, men and women, I think that the downside is that has meant it's a good thing that you're able to maybe do a bit more work in the evening and look after the kids or the parents in the daytime, but actually it's blurred work and life. And if you're not organized enough to recognize the difference between work and life, and I fell into this trap as well, you end up sort of thinking about work even if you're not working 24 hours a day. And so that's the sort of downside to it. But I think back to your original question, absolutely, yes, I think we are now appreciating even more than ever that you can work from home.
Can I just add into that? Sorry. You're right. I do agree with you. But I think, in an India context, that actually, the mass of people, we're in a very privileged position. Yeah. You have a very nice Zoom, background, and we have internet connectivity. I may be jinxing this, but we have electricity, we have, all of that. But for mass India, that's not necessarily the case. And, so I know some of my friends' staff, they are working from home. They're giving all of that support, but their homes are not appropriate for Zoom calls. They've got multi-generations running around, or they're basically in one up from a slum. It may be an official slum, it may be, but it's just not appropriate. So often you've got Zoom calls where you don't see the face, and that human you know, where we're not allowed to even meet. You know, as you said, India's had such a heavy, one of the world's harshest lockdowns, that this becomes really important, where you can make eye contact, you can see someone's face. But if they don't feel comfortable having that, you know, you're talking to a letter. And I think that's really difficult on a prolonged basis, you know, for human interaction and mental well-being.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I was just going to add on, and Mani's expressed it very eloquently in the context of India. I mean, again, I don't think those challenges are unique to India either. You know, what we're seeing here in the UK, what we're seeing in the US and many other countries is, you know, very rightly the issue of mental health rocketing up the agenda, because not everyone is as privileged as, you know, we are collectively fortunate to be in settings where this hybrid working climate actually suits us and can be quite convenient. The reality is that, you know, if you are a younger person in the workforce as well, I think this has disproportionately hit sort of millennial Gen Z, because they might not yet be at the place where they have their own space. They might just be working from the same bedroom for the whole period of lockdown, and that, you know, creates a huge amount of tension. And actually, one of the things that I was delighted to see in this summit in particular was an opportunity to discuss things like mental health, which have historically been rather brushed under the carpet for many societies across the world, including those in the UK and India. So it's a good thing that's coming up with the agenda, but as Mani says, that sort of person-to-person element of how we work is being missed. And, you know, that we have to end up in a future working culture where at least a hybrid element is involved, so we can get some of that person-to-person relationships back onto the agenda.
I know for a lot of people, and I think, Oliver, you touched on that compartmentalization, they've realized in this period that they don't like working from home. And as you say, Priya, some of it is to do with not having space. A lot of people who are in charge of offices have a great deal of space, or they have a country home, and they have said, everyone work from home, and they've closed down offices. And in reality, as I'm sure, Rima, you are sort of benefiting from, going to a workplace and having that separation of personal and professional is really important to a lot of people for their mental health, but also their ability to work efficiently. And I think, is there an opportunity here for people to work out for themselves what suits them, but also to ask companies to be a bit more flexible, because we've gone the other way in many ways with a lot of companies, where a lot of people aren't able to go back to work in an office, even when really that their office could make it COVID safe and allow that opportunity to go back.
Sonali, I'd just like to add, for me, it was the first day of lockdown. I got like a panic attack, and I was like, I cannot just wake up in my pajamas and from my living room from my bedroom go to my living room and start working. For me to wake up and have a disciplined life where I just get ready and I go to the office and I have my 2 screens and I can work efficiently from there was really important. So I would just wear my leggings, get out of bed, and, you know, start working. And I was like, this is not working out for me. So I had to come to the office. And I think I needed the boundaries of just waking up, that's life, and going to the office, walking back, and then I'm back home. So it's really important. It was actually freaking me out, the thought of just working from home, because where we come from in India, we have big homes and there's lots of space. So you have that division. So if I was in India, I would be going from my bedroom to the office downstairs, to my father's office. But out here, I didn't have the luxuries of a big apartment or a big house. So I think I just did it for my own sanity, I'll be honest. But a lot of people were not privileged enough to do that because they don't stay in central London. And they do prefer working from home because, firstly, they save time on the commute, and they're saving costs on the commute. Their lunches, they get to spend time with the family, make meals for their kids. I wouldn't know how it is, but I hear a lot in my workplace. So it has benefited some, and it has been mentally affecting some.
We're seeing more children pop up on Zoom. I'm not sure how annoying that is for the people that don't have children. It's highly embarrassing sometimes. If it's happened to me, I can hear mine jumping upstairs actually, so I apologize if you can do. But, you know, people can pop their laundry on in between calls. Is this making men, fathers realize actually you can do both if you have the will?
Can I come in as a father of two children, and so it's so I think that is one of the benefits of being here is that it's more affordable for me to have help, and during the lockdown we didn't have that help. But of course, when I'm in London, which I was 3 years before this, that wasn't the case. So I was much more used to balancing, to helping out with the children. But I think that I've certainly seen colleagues of mine here who have perhaps for the first time had to help out with that work at home. Now, I have no doubt that the domestic work has fallen heavily on the women in that family, but there has been so much because of the dramatic change in our lifestyles in the last 6 months that obviously the men have had to step up as well. And I've seen a number of male staff here really affected by this and struggling a bit. Now, I feel for them. I feel for their wives as well. But I'm hoping that there's an upside and that will come out of this with, as you say, a greater appreciation of what women have had to do for generations.
So what's the answer? Is this something that governments need to be dealing with, that companies need to be dealing with? Everyone seems to have a different priority at the moment, and so many sectors are suffering because of that. And early on, I know certainly here in Britain, when we used to see those press conferences, there were questions whether enough women were involved in the decision making about schools being closed and childcare. I used to see people kind of going, but how will we work if things are closed? What needs to be happening? Is anything happening already to stop that rollback, if indeed that is the case, of women's independence? Or will women's independence be this silent victim of the pandemic, and everyone will just have to sort of start again from where it ends up?
Maybe, Sonali, I can kick that off. And I think I'll kick that off with a comment about why this matters. We often focus on the stark reality of inequities on issues like gender or minority representation, but actually forgetting the why. And if you look repeatedly at studies done by organizations like, for example, McKinsey, it shows that when you have diversity of representation at a senior leadership level in companies, they perform better. So if you look at that through the prism of gender, a diverse leadership team by gender means that company performs better by about 25%. So that is a significantly different performance and a significantly better business performance. And obviously you can spread that analogy over to whether that's government decision making or third sector decision making, essentially any type of decisions that organizations need to make. So when you start from that prism, it is in everybody's interest in society to make sure that the gender inequity is not being exacerbated by the pandemic, and indeed some of the issues that we've been discussing are addressed and hopefully resolved and nudged towards a more diverse setup across all parts of the economy. Just in terms of your direct question on what interventions need to happen, I think for me it needs to start with data. Because what we've all been guilty of in this pandemic is a rush to find solutions, very rightly, because of what we see happening and the tragic situation we see happening in so many countries across the world. But without thinking about how those solutions should be analysed through the prism of areas like gender or racial background or social background or whatever the prism might be. So if you look at COVID support, one of the things that I've been advocating quite heavily for here in the UK is that the areas of government support that have gone into things like the innovation sector, the tech sector, need to be analysed through the prism of gender diversity and through minority representation. Because what we cannot risk is that the £1.25 billion of UK government support that has gone into the technology sector through areas like the Future Fund or through the Innovate UK grants that I've been privileged to be involved with through my board membership there. And we cannot risk those going into a very small segment of the overall economy, and therefore the progress that has historically been made being set back, not actually pushed forward. So data for me is really, really key. And then what we need to do on the basis of that data is make sure that we are holding people to a standard. That means that we are not setting back the issue of gender equality, and hopefully we are pushing it forward. You know, I've said that in the context of government interventions, but I think if you are a business that is looking on how to stay relevant post-pandemic for the issues that we've talked about with reference to better business performance, it is 100% in your interest as a business leader to be building your company to ensure that you have the right gender representation, the right minority representation, etc., in your post-pandemic company structure. So for me, it's absolutely fundamental.
But Priya, you say data is king. Companies will need to make sure they have that diversity of thought. But often, I don't think that messaging necessarily gets through, or people don't want to engage with that. At the moment, you could argue people are busy just worrying about their jobs. They don't have time to then think about the representation as well, which you could argue is very, very short-sighted, and perhaps that company won't survive for very long. But and I'll open this out to everyone, what would you say to a company that just is not engaging in this arena, or will not going forward because this has set the economy back so much?
I think if I can take that forward, that initially, you know, we're now in month 8, is it now? So sort of as we were getting used to this new thing called COVID and what it meant, you know, the initial how we were reacting to it from a personal standpoint or from a business standpoint now is different, because some months in, we're now all having to bring in some business continuity structures and, you know, meant okay, we're going to be in this. We're now planning that this is how what are we going to do? Because probably in the India context, we're going to be like this. My kids are going to be at home probably at least till the end of this school year, and, you know, at least probably till this time next year, until we've got a vaccine and all of that. So business continuity is absolutely key. Now, as part of that, I think, yes, data, absolutely. You know, we've been doing a lot of research into what is it that makes good business decision making. And one of those things is it's not just about women, it's about men. So, you know, if we're going to have gender equality, you know, there are two sides to that equals sign. So yes, we can all as women be banging on that, you know, actually we need to have better representation. We need to have more people on the board, more women on the boards, and more, you know, our voice needs to be heard. But for that to be really effective, you need to bring men into the argument. You need to bring men into that. So, you know, it could be from a business point of view, you know, actually having practices where you teach men how to talk to women. How do you address your female colleagues? What are appropriate conversations? And maybe in an India context, this might be quite specific because, you know, the sexes don't always mingle as freely as they do in the West. So I think having that cultural sensitivity and flexibility of what works in this context. But I think you have to have men or boys in that argument and in that discussion to really make it work, and then be able to tweak your practices as this is going forward and as the rules are changing.
Has this pandemic, in many ways, and the acceleration of working from home, therefore, presented an opportunity? because it's been tested out. Suddenly everyone has had to accelerate all the technology. People have had to find a way of working a different way. And actually now, will there be more demand for men to perhaps work a couple of days at home and share in that domestic duty? Because now everyone's seen it's possible. And these antiquated practices, many would argue antiquated practices, we shouldn't be going back to that. We need to be going forward to something else.
If I can sort of pick that up again. So in my business, you know, we've been working remotely for 11 years. We've been banging that drum of, you know, this works. You've got cost-effective solutions in India. You've got great platforms, you know, great know-how and ingenuity. And now suddenly with COVID, you know, the resistance that was there before has dissipated, and people go, yeah, actually it works. You know, depending, you know, whatever the your vertical, your so TCS, if we go into the tech sector, you know, TCS has announced that by 2025, only 25% of its workforce will be office-based. Now, that's a huge undertaking and it's a huge commitment, but it's also a huge, you know, pat on the back that this is working and that people are productive, and shows a very grown-up environment that you trust your colleagues to do what they're meant to be doing. And so, you know, I think you have to see the positive, and how do we build on this?
Rima, are you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. During the lockdown, all I noticed was a lot of offices closing. I have some friends who own law firms as well, and they're like, we're just working virtually, saves on their rent, their expenses. They can commute with each other on Zoom. There was another friend of mine saying that on their systems, they've got a green light which blinks after 10 minutes of the computer being idle. So they can actually track you if you're actually working, or, you know, if you're not working. But with our work, it's quite paper-based as well. So I could be reading, but, you know, my computer's left idle. So with our setup, it's quite voluntary. Like, we've encouraged to work from home once a day in my previous firms, because they wanted to reduce the space of the office and rotate the system. We've got our systems in place. I think whoever can come into the office voluntarily wanting to have got the option to do that. The office is always open. And whoever cannot because of kids, or they're shielding, they got vulnerable parents in the home, they are working from home. So it's whatever works for everyone, just to make it flexible and make lives easier for people right now, because already with the COVID situation, it's quite difficult. I don't think anyone wants to make other people's lives tougher, especially employers.
Sonali, if I may just come in with one comment. I mean, I think, you know, it's very right that we're having this conversation about gender, just because it's one of the stark sort of observations that we've all made about the implications of the pandemic. But I think we have to recognize that identity is also very multifaceted. The reality is that, you know, if you think about gender in the context of a relatively comfortable middle class setting, where our jobs can be necessarily done virtually if we choose that option, you know, that is a very different experience to somebody who is looking at the question of gender, but mapped against the perspective of a lower socioeconomic experience, perhaps a minority cultural background where there is exclusionary behavior in practice already. So the intersectionality of identity, I think, is a really, really important theme that we can't lose sight of. And I think there's always a risk that you end up with a potentially superficial conversation around gender as, you know, the one issue, where actually this is a very, very complex sequence of identities that can often result in people being excluded from the sort of future growth that we need to see post-pandemic.
And I think what you've touched on there is, again, goes back to the existing inequality. So the digital divide, for example, has been widened. Many people are arguing, especially when it comes to homeschooling, but also, as you say, access to the internet from a comfortable home. and the mental health crisis, as you say, because actually a consequence of offices closing, which a lot of comfortable people are okay with because they have the space, is that other small businesses are folding because no one is going back to their offices. And so it has a huge impact, especially on women who work in small businesses and the hospitality sector. And it's having a huge impact. So while it may be positive for that person to be able to work from home so they can do the school drop off, on other people, it's not so positive, is it? And the mental health crisis, which we've touched upon, is really real. And another one of a public health crisis, I think you touched upon, Rima, earlier was, and it's very disturbing, is that rise of domestic violence, during this pandemic. And the stats always indicate that domestic violence rises when families spend more time together, during holidays, Christmas, for example. And unfortunately, lockdown has been no different. And do you think that this is being dealt with because it is affecting women more?
I mean, I think the short answer is no. It's not being dealt with to the degree that it needs to be. I mean, that issues like domestic violence in any country anywhere in the world are shocking, and there are many elements that need to be addressed as part of the resolution. But firstly and primarily, finding ways for women to get out of those situations. And there has, thankfully, in the UK been an increased awareness of this because it has had some coverage in the media and other outlets. But the reality is, we have seen a rise. We have not seen ways for women to escape those scenarios. And let's just also be clear, this is not solely women. Domestic violence isn't always men on women. It can also happen in other directions as well. So the support systems need to be there. The awareness needs to keep being raised. And, we need to eradicate this problem as a society, because it is absolutely horrific that, at this point in the 21st century, this is an issue that is still raging behind closed doors in every single country in the world.
Yeah, and I mean the stats are, and you look at the stats, and of course this isn't a problem that is unique to India. It's across the world, including my own country. But you just look at the stats, and the number of reported cases of domestic violence over the first 3 months of this lockdown, well, higher than they've been in the previous 10 years of any similar 3-month period. Just as things look like they might be improving in India, and 86% of women don't seek help, and 77% of those don't even mention it to anybody, even within their own families. And so just the statistics, which, as I say, aren't unique to India, I'm sure, show that the problem is not, it's miles away from being resolved. But we need to somehow, women need to, and it's, yes, like you say, it's not just women, it can be men, it can be children as well, of course. They need to find, somehow collectively around the world, we need to find a way that victims of domestic violence can feel like they can talk to others and approach others. And of course, we need to address those abusers as well, and without making excuses for those who abuse, which is mostly men, but not always men. You need to understand why they're doing it and give them help. Again, I say, not make excuses for them, but understand why it's happening and give them help as well, educate them as well.
I'd just like to jump in. So during the period of the 3-month lockdown that we had, and there were these domestic issues, and we saw it on BBC, the government had a helpline. So we decided to come together collectively as a firm and provide a free service. So we started a couple of helplines. One was family and matrimonial, and that's where we would just advise the clients for free. Like whoever can call, you can say what you're going through, whether you're going through physical harassment or mental harassment, child sexual abuse, or any sort of threats that you're receiving. You could discuss it with our family department, and then we just provide you advice for free. So that was what we were offering. And I think there were a couple of other NGOs as well. They were offering the same similar services.
I think it's certainly transpired from this conversation that inequalities that already existed have been highlighted. What type of jobs women are in, how much unpaid work they're already doing, and many of these things have been exacerbated. What part can we all play now going forward? The pandemic is something we are going to have to live with, certainly in the short to medium term. But going forward, what opportunities are there to make sure that that rolling back, that going back in time when it comes to gender equality can be halted, and we can use this as an opportunity to start going forward again? Just some concluding thoughts from all of you would be really great. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to kick that off. I mean, I think from where I sit, sometimes we as societies need, a radical existential threat to wake us up to the reality of some of the problems we have. And I think that has come in spades with the COVID pandemic. And whilst it's really hard to sort of talk about silver linings that come out of something as dark as the cloud that has hit us with COVID, the reality is one of the silver linings, I believe, is that, there is a recognition as a society that the problems we have in issues like gender inequality need to be addressed as part of the solution going forward. And I stress, what I said earlier in my remarks, that this is both because it's the right thing to do, but because we will be better as a society and be economically more productive as a society if we get this right. And that for me is the opportunity.
Rima.
Professionally, I would just say that if you're a mentor, you can mentor your juniors, you can inspire them, you can support them, you can encourage them. Let's be kind, and we're just stronger together. That's the mantra of our firm.
Maybe I'll go next. Oh, go on.
Okay, Oliver, you jump in.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at silver linings, aren't we? And if we talk about the silver linings, we all, I think, appreciate that this has been had a terrible effect on so many of us. But I mean, I was, in preparation for this, I spoke to a friend, a woman who is Venezuelan but works in Canada, and she actually said that working from home had, in a way, leveled the playing field for her, because when she was at work, she went into a meeting, and she was a young woman from Venezuela, from a different country, and she felt that people judged her before she even opened her mouth. And now, as a letter on a screen, or even just as a person on a smaller face on a screen, she feels like she's being judged more now on her work. So let's look at all those positives. And in fact, I've been inspired by this conversation to have a conversation with my team here and look at all the positives and the negatives as well, and see if we can learn. I mean, it's about how long does it take to break a habit, okay? And maybe, again, one of the silver linings of an extended crisis is that we won't look at this as just a 6 months, we've got to get through it and then snap back to normal. Maybe it'll go on long enough for us to break this habit and harness those positives and learn from the negatives.
Mani, the last word goes to you, really. In a way, you were prepared for this all along.
Bringing up Maria. So yes, I think there's so many lessons to learn, and that there are some positives in that. I think different working practices have now, it's been supercharged, and people can see that it's a realistic option. And that means that companies are probably, more likely to say, okay, let's be flexible. So either they instill, yes, people can work from home for 2-3 days a week, or as and when you wish. That needs trust, that needs maturity. But I think sometimes when your hand is forced, that's the best, necessity being the mother of invention and all of that. I think bringing in some processes, I can see there's lots of initiatives happening, with creative hiring procedures, or to try and reduce the bias in promotion processes. So having sort of blind screenings or mini interviews, that kind of thing, so you're not being judged just on one interaction or one thing, and if that means that's done remotely, then why not? I think there's, but it's about learning, and it's about continually, the whole Kaizen, the Japanese continual improvement. And also it's not a one size fits all. So the things that work in the West don't necessarily work in the East, we need cultural fluidity. We need, that sort of understanding and empathy. And I love Rima's that I always try and finish on the be kind and be understanding, because we've all got different challenges.
Well, thank you so much. I really hope that those watching and listening have been inspired to talk to their teams, their workplaces, demand more, and at least have this conversation, because that can only be a positive thing. And I'm really, really grateful for all of your time. So Oliver Bull-Hatchett, Mani Trivedi, Rima Sengupta, and Priya Guha, thank you so much. And happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali. Be the light.